This time on Poll Hub, it's Groundhog Day for Donald Trump and getting indicted anyway. The ex-president has now been indicted 4 times in 4 jurisdictions by 4 grand juries composed of regular Americans. So, is it Groundhog Day and nothing's changed, or will the 4th time be different? We have brand new polling data on these questions, and we're looking into it. Then, E.T. phone Poll Hub. Aliens and UFOs are back in the news after a buzzy congressional hearing during which some witnesses made some pretty startling claims. It got us thinking. Americans love Star Wars and Star Trek, but do they really believe aliens are amongst us? Finally, it's August, time to think about a 3-day work week. Yes, let's do it! And hi everybody, welcome to Poll Hub. I'm JD Dapper.
I'm Barbara Carvalho.
I'm Mary Griffith.
I'm Alton Hollis.
And I am Lee Marendal.
Well, Lee and Barb, it seems like another month, another indictment for former President Donald Trump. Well, not quite, but it does seem to feel that way. And now the latest indictment came out earlier this week, late on Monday, out of Georgia, and focuses on President Trump's alleged involvement in overturning the presidential election results in that state. We happen to have just wrapped a poll asking about President Trump's legal woes and the implications for 2024. So, Barb, what is the data telling us? Does it matter that President Trump is embroiled in all of these legal battles?
Well, it depends to whom. So, it depends what side of the fence are you on. So obviously, Democrats are certainly hopeful that the president will be held accountable for, what they see as a whole list of infractions. Republicans, on the other hand, seem relatively unfazed. In fact, it seems that with each new indictment, the president actually becomes stronger among his base of people who identify as Republicans. Then there are those independents who are sort of in the middle, but they really lean one way or the other. They are really soft, what we call soft identifying Democrats or soft identifying Republicans. And right now, those independents are in the president's corner as well. One of the things that we found was that 52% of Americans overall think Trump should drop out of the 2024 presidential contest. Interestingly, that's very similar to an AP NORC survey, which is also out this week, that said that 53% of Americans would definitely not vote for the president. But most Republicans, 78%, and 49% of independents say that he should remain in the race. And in fact, 66% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents say that Trump is the best person to lead the GOP for 2024. 31% say Trump has too much baggage to be a contender. But his ratings are pretty solid among his base. And certainly as we look forward to the primaries, particularly the GOP primaries, which are coming up in just several months, he is certainly the front runner for the nomination.
Yeah, I must say, Mary and Barb, this is always somewhat surprising to me, but at some point you have to stop being surprised. What's up is down, what down is up. You have someone who's getting unprecedented. I mean, we've never had a former president go through this kind of legal problems in terms of indictments, and he's pushing 100 felony indictments at this point. And this seems, as Barb has said, is unfazed the GOP. And it must feel frustrating if you have decided you're going to run against Donald Trump in the Republican primary. And that just doesn't mean DeSantis. It means the whole crowd of them, everybody waiting for something to stick and trying to take a different slice of it. Well, I'll do what Trump did on policies, but I won't have the baggage. Well, in this poll, we asked people, does this guy have too much baggage for the Republicans, basically? And the answer was no. The Republican Party is Donald Trump's party right now. And we can poll and others can. And until we see a crack in the armor, he is sitting good.
What I find really interesting is when we take a look at the question about whether or not President Trump has done something illegal, unethical, but not illegal or has done nothing wrong, and we dig into the numbers among Republicans, Only 44%. I know that seems like a large proportion. That is the plurality. Think that he's done absolutely nothing wrong. So really, there is a majority of Republicans who do think that he has done something wrong, whether it be illegal, which is a small proportion, unethical or not illegal, or they're just not sure. So is this really a case of there not being somebody punching through on the Republican side to take that standard bearer role away from President Trump? Lee, you talked about the Republicans being the party of Trump right now.
Yeah, and no one is. I mean, DeSantis was sort of seen as the heir apparent, and that has not taken hold. Former Vice President Mike Pence is the lowest, I guess, the former vice president has been at this point. And Donald Trump, I mean, no one has had the kind of lead he has as a former president and seen that dissipate. Now, with Donald Trump, anything's possible. And I don't know where are we going to be in 4 months, 6 months, 8 months in terms of the legal process. And will there be court cases going on? Will there be any kind of deal made for him to avoid what might be a prison sentence? There's still a whole lot to unwrap here, which we obviously can't do until the time comes. But right now, this is all playing his way, regardless of what's happening, I should say electorally playing his way, regardless of what's happening on the legal front, to the point that the toss-up questions for the general election between Biden and Trump are pretty much even in our poll as in other people's. So right now, we're looking ahead to what would be, should nothing change. And I'm always reminded these people are always, about 80 years old, and something could very well change. We're looking at another weird, hotly contested presidential election.
One thing, though, that I did also want to point out in this particular poll is there is a consensus on one thing between Democrats and Republicans, and that's regardless of party, 87% of Americans, which is actually up from 83% in December of last year, say there's a serious threat to our democracy. The problem is they disagree on what that threat is. And that is what our political system, our political debates are going to all be about.
Yeah, and I'd like to underscore that point because I find that really fascinating. You look and we hear everything is polarized. Well, this time it isn't in terms of the overall number. I mean, as you said, 87% of Democrats, 88% of Republicans, and 88% of independents think there's a serious threat to democracy. So, I mean, basically, it doesn't matter what your political allegiances are. You see this as a big trouble for the democracy. That's the only point that's broken through. But as you indicate, on the one hand, that's taking the Constitution apart versus on the other hand, rigging an election. And those are two separate worlds entirely.
All right, now we're going to switch the gears up a little bit with a topic that's extraterrestrial.
You heard that right. Today, we're talking about the recent news that might confirm aliens are real and they're closer than we thought. In a recent House Oversight Committee meeting, retired Major David Grush said some things that have made some headlines. And some argue they've made him a whistleblower, too.
So he just recently testified that the United States have been covering up a long-standing program that not only retrieves but reverse engineers unidentified flying objects, or UFOs. And not so surprisingly, the Pentagon has denied all these claims.
Yeah, Grush was asked about whether the U.S. government had information about extraterrestrial life. He said the government has been aware of non-human activity since the 1930s, but he couldn't provide any specific evidence. He said he could, but he'd only say more in a secure or classified setting.
Now, former Navy commander and pilot David Fravor also testified, and he said that he had a firsthand experience with a UFO shaped like a Tic Tac. He was never briefed on this object or its origins. And former Navy pilot Ryan Graves also recounted an experience he had with a black cube floating inside a clear sphere. All three of these men agreed that these objects were national security threats.
And it's worth noting these are all on video that was recorded from the planes they were flying. The video's not necessarily super clear, but there is video. So this question is, are there really aliens amongst us? And you probably aren't surprised, this is a polling podcast after all, that there's actually been a lot of polling asking Americans about ETs.
A recent one from Gallup in 2021 asked Americans if they thought some UFOs had been alien spacecrafts visiting Earth from other planets or galaxies, or if all UFO sightings could be explained by human activity or just natural phenomenon. 50% said that it was human activity or natural phenomena, and 41% said UFO sightings were actual aliens.
So I wonder if it's always been like that. Let's go back a little bit and see if Americans have always felt this way. There's a Newsweek and Princeton Survey Research Associates poll that asked a similar question back in 1996. They asked Americans whether UFOs were probably alien ships or alien life forms, or if they were some natural scientific explanation for them. This time, 51% said natural scientific explanation. Only 20% said that these ships were ships or real aliens. So it seems like more Americans believe in alien spacecraft now than in the 90s, but about half still aren't very convinced.
So now, as to whether we've actually made contact with aliens themselves, a majority also didn't believe this. In that same 1996 survey, 54% said that we have not made contact, and 28% said that yes, we have. But while Americans are skeptical about UFOs and ETs making contact, many also distrust what the government has to say about it. The Newsweek Princeton Survey Research Associates poll also asked whether Americans believed that the government was keeping information from the public on UFOs that shows that they're real or that aliens have visited Earth. 49% said yes, that the government was keeping information from the public, and 37% said no, it wasn't. 14% said that they did not know.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this right, Advin. A majority believe we haven't made contact with aliens and that UFOs aren't alien spaceships, but that the government is covering up both of these things that are true.
Exactly. Makes total sense, right? So now back to the hearings last month. Americans clearly have a very complicated relationship with aliens and the government. But how will this new information change their outlook on aliens? And if we ever do make contact with aliens, or if we already have, how do we think it will go? All right, so in 1998, Gallup asked Americans who said humans will have made contact or received contact with aliens if aliens are more likely to be friendly or hostile to humans. Surprisingly, Americans are not skeptical or distrusting of aliens. 78% said friendly and only 17% said hostile.
So we distrust our government, but we trust the aliens. Okay, sure. So I have another question. What are these friendly aliens going to look like?
Great question. Opinion Dynamics wanted to know the same thing as well and asked Americans in 1999 if they thought that there were alien creatures in the galaxy that looked like those that were portrayed in Star Wars. Only 25% said yes, and a majority of 58% said no, and 17% were unsure.
Okay, so let me see what we've learned here in this segment. We don't believe UFOs are alien spaceships or that aliens have visited Earth. We do believe that the government is lying about both things, and by implication that they are actually true. We believe that aliens will be friendly, and when and if they do come, they will not be Wookiees, Ewoks, or Baby Yodas from a galaxy far, far away. Do I have that right?
Exactly. So overall, Americans have a lot of conflicting beliefs about aliens, but I don't know, could they be real? We might never know.
Okay, so now we're going to take a look at this week's fun fact, which I think you'll find quite entertaining. A question that was asked by Gallup poll in 1965, a long time ago. They asked, looking ahead to 1985, in that case, 20 years from then, which of these do you think will happen by then? Will we be working a 3-day work week? And the country, 28% said yes. 60% said no, and 12% said, gee, I don't know. Now, this question then puts us into a looking forward, but a long time ago. And one of the things that certainly has happened more recently is that COVID has changed. If you were asking this question today, you no doubt would talk about working remotely versus working on site, which is many modes that people are working full-time. The different employment practices. I think what was intended way back when was the idea that technology would provide more leisure time so that we would not be needed in the workplace as long a week as was the case at that point. Clearly, that part hasn't happened. In fact, people are working multiple jobs when they can to make ends meet. Working 3 days a week and only being paid for 3 days a week would be a problem. But does this surprise you then, or do you want to comment on where we are now in the workforce?
Well, there was certainly, I think, some optimism with the start of, as you mentioned, Lee, the technological revolution that was still probably about 10 years to 15 years ahead when the PC made its debut in 1980. But this is the time when everything was automating, and the idea that people would have more leisure time because of that automation was something that was often discussed. And as we all know, it really didn't work out that way at all. One of the things, though, that was of concern and that many people had to live through was the transfer or transition from a more manufacturing society and work opportunities to a more technological one and a more service-oriented one. So unfortunately, instead of allowing people to work less time for the same money and having more people work because of that automation, a lot of people were laid off during that transition and certainly struggled through the 70s and 80s to make that adjustment. But oh my, how the new century has changed us all.
For sure.
I'm going to add a twist to this as well, a gender twist, if you will, for somebody who grew up in the 80s. And so I think if this question were asked of women in particular in the mid 1980s, I don't think women would have wanted to have just worked a 3-day work week. I have the visual of women going to work in Manhattan with sneakers and socks on, changing into their heels in the office to make their way in the workforce. And I think that asking that question, that question would have been asked in the mid 80s as opposed to mid 60s, looking ahead to the mid 80s, I think that would have been a little bit insulting.
So, Lee and Barb, I have a question for you guys. You are my boss and you're Mary's boss. Can we work 3-day work weeks?
Jay, you work so
Nice try, Jay.
Yeah, you work so quickly that I think you put 5 days work into 3 days anyway. But we benefit from that speed with which you bring it, and Mary provides that insight. Freud has shown up.
I insult no one.
No,
Lee. Well, at least
that's the
intentionally.
farthest thing from the truth with you, but you certainly provide a full week's worth of insights. I'm curious in this, Ethan Hollis, I'd like to know whether this is a question that would even be relevant for someone of your generation today. I mean, is this something that is on your mind at all?
I mean, I feel like in recent news, more people have been pushing for a 3-day work week. And I feel like with remote work, it's something that could actually happen. So I think if this question was asked now, I feel like the answers would be flipped. I feel like a lot more people would be more open to a 3-day work week.
Yeah, but only if the old 2 days are remote. I think that has to do with how much you're going to get paid for your efforts. And that, I think, is the big difference here from way back then to what we're seeing and what we've experienced more recently since then.
That'll do it for Poll Hub this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Ethan Hollis, Emily DuPoint, Eve Fisher, and Delaney Hayes.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, please consider leaving a review.
Positive reviews help other listeners like you find us.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Maris Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
Finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub,
There is a subscribe button. Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you in your podcast app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.